final webinar series episode, 5 Steps to Become Globally Competitive, Benchmarking Phase. I'm your host for this afternoon, Nadia Bayer-Thomas, Director of 800 Tech, and this is my co-host, Schofield Thomas, Managing Director of 800 Tech. Welcome, Schofield.
Thank you. So, by now, I think everybody know who we are. It's really always a nice introduction. And we are at this point, guys, we are at the point where we're going to be looking at, which is more to the end of the process of becoming globally competitive. But before we jump into the benchmarking phase, I want to just step back a bit and remind us where we came from. We came from the strategic phase into the planning phase, into the scoping phase, implementation, which was a little heavy, where we get all our nice DX tools in there and project management. And then we had training last week, where we had a wealth of information being presented to us on how we could conduct training and the benefits of training. And today, we're here. We are at the end of the process. We've interjected all this transformation, all this innovation in our company. But then we want to know the $1 million question. What is the return on investment here? So how do we get that? So we get that from benchmarking. So Nadia, help us. What is it and how do we do it? How do we know, that it's working?
Well, let me start by first explaining to our audience what benchmarking is. And benchmarking is really a way of the company doing a comparison at certain reference points. And what I mean by that is you're looking at key metrics within the organization that you're going to compare either internally within the organization or externally. And these metrics you're really using because you want to, at the end of the day, be able to improve the processes within the organization. You want to be able to reduce costs within the organization, but more importantly, you want to be able to strengthen customer loyalty with regards to the brand, with regards to the service, with regards to the product. And these are key components. Something else that we need to understand with benchmarking, and I just mentioned it a minute, is that it really falls under the umbrella of whether you're doing the internal perspective or the external perspective. And to step all the way back to even the strategic phase, Schofield, it's for us to understand how does the organization view itself? Is the organization viewing itself as I am competing solely in a national perspective? Am I competing in a regional perspective? Am I competing in a global perspective? Because that really determines how they look at their different benchmarking tools and which benchmarking tools they use, because there's so many that you can use when you're doing benchmarking.
Yeah, so it's not enough for the technology enthusiasts to say, hey, we've introduced some DX tools and we've transformed your business, so just take my word for it, you should be better off now. That's
not at all. No, not at all. Because, okay, let's look at it from this perspective. When you enter an organization after you've completed that digital transformation exercise, some of the processes are in a very, what I would call a very rustic manual phase where it's completely 100% paper-based. Some are where we call a kind of hybrid, where some of the forms may be in Excel, while some may be in a job sheet book, while others may be in some sort of ad hoc application. So it's a kind of mishmash of things. When we've completed that digital transformation exercise, we now need to see from an internal benchmarking perspective, that's where we look within the organization, how have we improved where we were, the current state, going right back to what we were discussing when we were in the earlier phases, versus where we are now, the future state. Have we really had a profound impact on the organization? Yeah. Now, to do this, there are 3 key components. Now, there are others, but the 3 main components when we are dealing with benchmarking is the time, the cost, and the quality. So when it comes to digital transformation, one of the key elements you look at is definitely how does this transformation impact on the time of the process? So an organization may invite you in. They may say, listen, this is the process that has been executed, but what I want you to now do as an expert in benchmarking is to tell me, has this really impacted my bottom line? Do I,
So,
as you rightly said, go,
so what
yes.
I'm hearing here is that the benchmarking phase is more like a validation of the future state and a validation on, the cost of getting here. So we're gonna really check to see, okay, did this future state with all the tools that we put in, did it really create efficiency and increase performance in the company? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's one aspect of it. Definitely, that's one aspect of it. But it's also used, and this is when we flip it around now and we look at the external perspective. How much do we need to do again to achieve that competitive edge, to meet our
Right.
competitors where they are? So right now we're looking more from the internal perspective, and the internal perspective is exactly what you said. Have we achieved our goal? Bottom line, to put it very simply. And you look at it, let's say the age-old process that everybody knows well, leave management.
Mm-hmm.
In some organizations, the leave management is still very much that rudimentary, pull a sheet of paper, fill out a form, go through the whole long process, along the way, bottlenecking, losing of the documentation, etc., and may take anywhere from a week to 2 weeks. Versus you implement now a digital transformation process. And once you've done this, there's an application now which allows and functions as a vehicle for the leave management to take place. So a process that has now taken 2 weeks or 1 week, depending, has now been reduced to an hour, 3 hours, because it's being pushed along using the vehicle of the application.
Yeah.
So that in itself is, we're now benchmarking and we're looking at the historical performance of that singular process versus the current performance of that process. And this is how we can tell, have we improved? Have we reduced on time? These are the ways that they look at things from an internal perspective. And they do this in certain organizations, process by process by process, or department by department, because they can also do comparatives of departments to see if you recognize a department as stellar within your organization. This department is always a high performing department. You can also use your benchmarking tools. And this is where we get into the types of benchmarking, and this one would be more focused on performance benchmarking. What are they doing right? And what do the other departments need to do to implement in the environment to create that same level of efficiency?
Right.
And
So what I'm hearing from you, just want to make sure that we all on the same page, is that we can actually perform benchmarking between departments or interdepartmental benchmarking,
definitely.
where we have similar processes happening within these individual departments, and we compare them based on effectiveness and efficiency.
That's correct.
And
That is
also,
absolutely correct.
we can actually look at our current state benchmark process, well, wherever we were at that current state, and then the future state, we look at where we are now, and we compare not just based on how fast we got things done, but with what efficiency and what enhancements it brought into the
Yeah.
environment. Is that what you're saying? So we can look at that internally in that realm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And because there are three key parameters that I mentioned before, time, quality, and cost, depending on the process, that dictates which parameters you focus on. So for instance, with the same leave management example, our focus may be more on time and on quality. With, let's say, producing a product in the organization, the focus will be more on cost. Okay, the old method to produce this singular bottle or produce this singular product, whatever it may be, may cost us $100, I'm just saying. But now with all of these new interventions, producing this bottle now costs us $50. So you're able to see the impact it's having.
Yeah, and not just on cost. So while you were speaking there, something came to mind. You may realize that, you know what? This department normally would spend $100 to create this particular item, but we would take so many days to do it. And we're wondering why that would happen. But now when we pull a report from our leave management system, we recognize that employees are all taking leave for a particular type of issue, which may be a HSE issue internally, that we can rectify. They may be getting sinuses, let's say, to be as simple as possible. They may be getting their sinuses inflamed because of the high component of dust in the environment. So we look at all the leaf forms that came in, and probably with the attached their medical form with it, we then realize, they're all coming for respiratory issues. They're being sent in for respiratory issues. So hence the reason why we always short staff in the factory. So now we can take measures to put in place to get them PPE equipment and whatever else gaps we need to fill there, to ensure that, the production is high, and then we may see an increase in productivity in the next coming months, when we do another benchmarking exercise.
And that component is where, and this kind of leads us into the actual process of benchmarking when you get into an organization, because what you just spoke about is recommendations that you would advance to the executive body. Right. And it's important to note that not all the time they ask for recommendations. Sometimes you are required to come in, they give you specific things to benchmark on, but they don't want your recommendations. What they want are the results of the benchmarking exercise. Make sense? Yeah. So you can do it that way, or they would say, listen, yes, we want you to benchmark, but based on your results, we also want you to now provide us with the recommendations to rectify what is taking place within the environment.
So you have the evidence.
Exactly. Now you have it, because any recommendation you give must be data driven. That is absolutely important. It's not just a gut feeling. You have concrete evidence that this is why we are now recommending to you, your organization must put these measures in place. But when we look at the process of benchmarking, the first step is really identifying which process they want us to look at. Is it an internal perspective? Is it an external perspective? If it's internal,
you keep mentioning the internal perspective and the external perspective. For the average business owner, can you define what you're speaking of when you say internal processes? And I'm guessing now, just to make sure that all the questions are answered, that the internal process is what we were just speaking about.
Exactly.
All internal activities. And now the external process is where we benchmark against.
When we benchmark against external elements, meaning that, for instance, and I'll give a very simple example. Let's look in the pizza industry, pizza producing industry. We have Domino's, we have Pizza Hut, we have Joe's. So Pizza Hut has decided to benchmark against its competitors within its industry. They're looking at, okay, my driver takes 30 minutes to get from point A to point B. But when I look in the industry, Domino's driver may take 20 minutes. So they're doing a comparison between their driver and an external competitor. And this is where you take an external view, because remember, it's a competitive environment and you want to either match or surpass someone within your industry. And now part of the benchmarking process is not just recognizing the performance of your competitors, but also seeking to understand why they are succeeding. Because when you have an understanding as to why they succeed, now part of the recommendation as a person carrying out the benchmarking exercise is understanding why they're succeeding, and now seeing how these particular tools that they use or their business model can now fit into the current business model, or perhaps the current business model needs to be tweaked to create that level of improvement and efficiency, reduction in cost, all these things that we talk about, reduction in time to provide a service or produce a product, as the case might be. So this is where the external perspective comes in. And it does not only have to be at a national level, it can be at the global level. There may be something that Pizza Hut is seeing that an external party in the States or even Italy, it doesn't even matter, they're doing well. And by seeing that, they may say, you know what, we want to have an understanding of how we can achieve that level of success that they're achieving. And this is where it's so data driven. This is where you do the deep dive. And the deep dive could be, some companies, they actually provide you with the data. So it's easy to find, it's easy to ascertain why they do or succeed the way they succeed. Some companies, you simply have to do the deep dive research. You have to Google it, pull some reports, all the different, mechanisms that you have to use. But at the end of the day, it's really to have an appreciation of how they do what they do, how they succeed the way they succeed, and look at their business model and see what elements, it may not be all, but what elements you can now utilize and implement into the current space that you're in to enhance and get them to the state or the targeted state that they wish to be.
So that is more strategic benchmarking, and strategic benchmarking can be looked at both internally and externally.
Yes.
So what you just described is more strategic external benchmarking, where you're looking at your competitors or your competitive space that you're in, and you're now benchmarking yourselves against what is being offered in the market. And you can do that also per process and per performance alike.
Yes, very much. It can literally, you can drill it down as much as you like. And this is why I said from the beginning, you can look at it by process, you can look at it by department, you can look at it from an organizational perspective. It is really based on what the executive is asking of you to benchmark. And sometimes even in the process, you may say, listen, I know you wanted me to look primarily at the department on a whole, but these elements also need to be examined because these elements connect to what I'm looking at, and I'm seeing that there is some data that we need to get from here we need to improve this first. In other words, it's like a subset of, we need to improve this first before we can get to the department component of it.
So as you're on that, I'm seeing a very interesting question. The discussion around benchmarking happens at the beginning of digital transformation. That's a question. If it happens at the beginning. So do we decide that we want to benchmark at the beginning of the transformational process, or does it matter if we just decide at the end we want to benchmark?
I will tell you this. Normally what we do is we get, well, this would fall under the umbrella, let me just say, of performance benchmarking. Because when we go into the digital transformation, we first need to get a baseline in terms of the performance of all of the different processes. Right. So to answer your question, yes, when we come in and our discussions, we have to understand, okay, this is the process you're sharing with me. What is the length of time does it take? Or how much does it cost? The same parameters we spoke about, the cost, the time, the quality. We get an understanding and appreciation of the current state because we need to use those parameters to benchmark at the end of it. So you get that information there. Not that you cannot ask it at the very end, but it's always good, I find personally, to ask it at the beginning, because when you've implemented and things run like a well-oiled machine, people tend to forget how it used to be. But when it's a sticking point, they're very eager to say, these are the issues I'm having with quality. These are the issues I'm having with the timeline of things reaching for me. They can give you the check boxes of why we're not meeting our deadlines, why the quality is not up to par very easily when they're in the thick of things. So we normally do it at the start. And then we now at the very end of the project say, okay, now these were your challenges at the start. We've put all these interventions into place. Let's go back through these challenges. Let's see where we are now. Your timeline was 2 weeks. What is your timeline now? And we go through the checkbox of things to really have an appreciation if the whole process has had a profound impact on the organization.
But I just want to say, for business owners who are probably on their way already of digital transformation and they didn't do benchmarking or baseline performance snapshots at the beginning of the process, and probably at the end of your process, and you want to know, where you stand, and you don't have that historical data that you can reference, you can feel free to always look externally and benchmark your internal process against another provider's internal similar process, just to get a snapshot of where you stand, because you must have a comparative of where you stand, with these processes in terms of time, performance, cost, all those things that you're looking for. So you can also do it at the end, but you may have to do it a little differently if you don't have the historical data. If you can't get the historical data, great. But if you can't, then you may look externally and benchmark it against a competitor, in the market who's providing service that you find they're probably outperforming you. It's always good to look at that and be honest with yourself. That's always critical. You have to be honest with yourself, to realize, okay, this competitor is doing this well, and I want
Yes.
to be able to match that or surpass.
And something I just want to also mention, Scofield, you may not always find the competitor, quote unquote, to benchmark against that's in your industry.
Right.
And that's where you use something that they call the targeted approach. So in other words, I can't find somebody else who's doing pizza, or I can't find somebody else who's producing bottles, but you can find some other company that is performing and the process similar in kind. So it doesn't have to be someone in your industry, but someone who's performing a process similar in kind that you can now view as your targeted approach, as this is where I would like our organization to be in terms of performance. So it's not that they're producing plastic bottles like you, but this is how I would like us to be performing. Let me still examine their business model and see what adjustments we need to make. And that's another way of looking at it, because in some instances, you simply can't find a good fit to do the comparison. And in those instances, you step out of your industry a little bit.
So for the business owner that would say, why do I need to benchmark? What is this for? Why am I doing this? Why am I wasting more money to get somebody to come and do a benchmarking exercise for me? What would you say are some of the advantages, for that business owner?
The advantages are it brings you right back, quite honestly, to the parameters, the cost that it has, the impact on cost that it has in your organization. Because remember, the more efficient you can make your organization, the less you're going to be spending, because now processes are more efficient, more effective. You're also looking at ensuring that, and when we spoke, and I spoke in the beginning about customer loyalty, and a lot of times when we speak about customer loyalty, persons think of it again from an external perspective. Customer loyalty, there are internal customers, that's your staff, and then there are external customers. So when you can make an employee's life easier, when you can make their function something quick to do, they're more enthused to do it. You get more productivity out of them. There's a ripple effect to all of these things. So you're getting things done faster because time is impacted. You're getting your costs reduced on producing something. You're getting your customer satisfaction internally and externally. These are the key elements of it. But most importantly, and I go right back to the topic of this webinar, to give you that global competitiveness that you're looking for. And that's the bottom line, because you need to know how your external parties, how your competitors are performing, what they are doing, what they are doing right, what they are doing well, and you need to adjust your business model to meet or surpass that. And the only way you can do that is to do the necessary due diligence to know where you are and where you need to be. It's as simple as that. Otherwise, you're going to be in a static or paralyzed space with no growth happening within your organization.
So I'm going to hit you a little curveball, Nadia, because this is another interesting question. Do you want to have a specific department to perform benchmarking, or should you hire a professional or consultant to do that in your organization?
That's a good one. I would recommend hiring an external person to do the benchmarking, because I think when you're too close to the situation, it's difficult for you to have that clarity of perspective. Yes, that objectiveness, because it eliminates the bureaucracy that may take place in an organization of whose toes I'm stepping on, all of the other excitement that goes along with it. I'm coming in with a very clear mission as an external party. This is my role. These are the processes, or this is department, or whatever it is I have been asked to benchmark. And these are my findings in a very unbiased way. These are my findings. And I have found that to be most useful. One moment, guys, we're having slight technical difficulty. My co-host, Sophie Thomas, has just been bumped off. So if we can just hold a little bit while he tries to get himself back on. And here we are.
Yes,
there we go.
happened.
Yeah. I think the ISP dropped you off, but that's okay.
Yeah.
No, where I left out, I was just simply saying that to make sure that we have a very unbiased perspective, I always think it's best to have an external person coming and do the benchmarking and also do the recommending of where the business model may need to shift or be tweaked in any way to make sure that you have excellence within your organization.
Yeah, got you. Any final words, Nadia, before we wrap?
Any final words?
Well, what I would say is we've been on this journey for probably a month and a half, sorry.
Nearing 2 months, yes.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. In our research, a lot of learnings, and we want to thank all our featured speakers, all our guests that we had, for sharing with our audience, the importance of the different aspects of the different phases that we identified. And we want to thank them all for being a part of this series where we could do our part, and we're all doing our part in helping Caribbean businesses to become globally competitive. All right. So tomorrow, guys, we are going to be the company that's going to be in bridging the digital divide.
Yes.
It's I think it's Chamber of Commerce that's putting on that.
CARICHAM. Well, it's CARICHAM, yeah.
All right, so CARICHAM is having that tomorrow and Friday, and we are part of that. We're representing Trinidad and Tobago via the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce, and we're going to be there. We're going to be having discussions. We're going to have a booth on digital transformation and the strategy behind it. So if you have time tomorrow, go ahead and register. We'll post that link on our website and our social media platform, and please register to attend the CARICHAM Expo tomorrow. It's all about bridging the digital divide. All right. So guys, on behalf of 800 Tech and all of our other co-hosts that we had along the 6 weeks, you want to thank you very much for tuning in. We hope that has been informative for you. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at info@800-tech.com. You can call us also at 223-8324. And we'll be happy to answer all your questions or tag us up on social media platforms. So once again, thank you very much, and we're happy that you're a part of this process.
Thank you, guys. It was indeed a privilege sharing the last 2 months with you all, and it was indeed a privilege just being able to give you guys all this good information. As Schofield said, have a good one. Goodbye, guys.
Bye-bye.